Hello everybody, I am outside, which is a bit different, a bit of a change, but today we're going to be talking about a subject we really care about, the development of some of the bands that we love the most and the bands who are coming up, the changes in this music scene, this music industry that we love, and the changes in the groups. But first of all, I should probably just address this whole outside thing. See, I thought of this subject for a video right as I was getting ready to go out to the shops, and so I decided that's a good opportunity to get this little GoPro that I have and use usually for that channel down in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, band broadcast, where we interview bands. Well, let's get that camera, take it outside, go for a walk and a talk. And you know what? I don't want to be one of those nuisance streamers. So as a result, I have deliberately picked my route to the shops to avoid as many people as possible. Hence why I'm walking under a maintenance highway, although I'm about to go onto a small road. I'm avoiding people, okay? I'm doing my best. So if Japan looks really boring and quiet, that's just the route I picked to the shops. Anyway, let's jump into this, because like I say, we're going to be talking about stuff that we as a community really care about. And the reason why this subject came to mind was mostly because of the fact that, well, first of all, I was thinking about the band who I spoke about recently, Haku, who, you know, when we first talked about them a couple of years ago on the Twitch stream, they were brought to my attention as just this tiny band with like a couple of hundred subscribers. Like, hey, Howard, check this out. I thought, okay, interesting indie band. And then suddenly we checked back with them recently and they got like 500,000 subscribers and they're this huge deal. And it's amazing to see how bands like that now they're the hot topic. But then at the same time, we're getting huge amount of community responses when we talk about other bands like BAND-MAID and BABYMETAL, who themselves have been around for quite a while. And I was looking at pictures of BAND-MAID recently and sort of doing some thumbnails and stuff. And when you're doing thumbnails, you look for pictures, you'll Google at various places, try and find some good images to use. And you're looking at the mixture of like pictures from when they first started and how they look now. And just the difference is amazing. You know, they look so different. And I've joked a few times before, I wonder what BAND-MAID are going to look like, you know, when they're all in their 60s and 70s. It's like the term maid is going to have a very different meaning. It's not going to be like the Akihabara maid anymore. But you know what, if any band's going to lean into it and have fun with what that will look like, it will probably be them. So you can imagine them just as the little old maids cleaning up as they do their show. But then again, there's also been other bands like, you know, we've mentioned with bands like BABYMETAL. They've hit such an interesting thing as they've had to develop over the years and they've had to deal with you know, sort of growing up. Now obviously the explanation of the name BABYMETAL, it was explained before. I think someone will be able to give a much better description in the comments below, but the term baby was, you know, it's more to use with the infancy of the metal genre and stuff. It wasn't really talking about them actually being baby aged, but I think most people took it on board that one of the most interesting things about the juxtaposition that made them famous was that difference between being a youthful sort of school-aged idol group. I mean, remember they came out of Sakura Gakuin, literally meaning school. You know, they were a school idol group that birthed BABYMETAL as a subunit. So the idea of being young was a big part of the juxtaposition that made them so interesting to begin with. And then when you look at what they've become now, you know, they very much fit in with the metal group. And, you know, this is the, you know, look at most of the people they're collaborating with and the people they're friends with. It's like big, hairy biker dudes with tattoos and stuff. So, you know, I mean, obviously that's just a bit of a stereotype, but you get the idea. There's been that big transition. And one of the things that I've said has been most impressive about how BABYMETAL have achieved this is by the fact that they have effectively, well, I think they had a bit of a weird spot when it was just Sue and Moa. They were great, but it seemed a little bit like it wasn't really sure where they were going to go. They were definitely trying to lean into a darker aspect. They were trying to become more legitimate. But I think in doing that, and in Sue taking over the majority of the vocals, they became a group with a much more down the middle sound. You know, you listen to albums like the other one, it's great, but it's not so entirely unique. But I think it was becoming a three-piece group again. Adding Momoko gave them back the dynamic, the balance that they had originally from the get-go of being, you know, okay, you've got one singer up front, but you've got a little bit of craziness in the duet who are standing behind her. And it's interesting because, as I've said before as well, since really things like Ratata and even since Metali, since that video came out, which I would say that video was probably the point when I realized this, they found a new way of mixing heavy with cute, because it was no longer sort of like a childish cuteness. It was more like a playful, fun, innocent, hey, look, we're three women dancing whilst doing metal kind of cuteness. You know, the sort of cuteness that you can have whilst also being an adult. You don't suddenly lose the ability to be cute and charming just because you're not a child anymore. It just becomes a very different thing. And this in itself, so we're talking about sort of groups aging. And this really brought me back to the first time I ever really came across this problem, or this concept, I would say, which was absolutely years ago with the artist Oatscry, who was a solo singer who many of you will know if you've been following this kind of music for a very long time. And she was particularly famous for her, shall we say, outlandish. Her first album cover was very cute. Her second album cover was very kind of subversive in a sort of childish humour kind of way, but she always had that charm. And then as time moved on, there was a lot of people, I remember there was a lot of online discourse, because this was like pre-2005, which means it was pre-YouTube and prior to a lot of the social media that we know. So, there was a lot of conversation on forums and stuff about, I just remember people saying, it's like, well, she's not a kid anymore, she can't do that cutesy stuff forever. And thinking, but why? I think there is this image, and of course a lot of you will know that this has been referenced previously, people talking about certain, I'm not going to say them, but certain phrases and concepts that sometimes come up in Japanese society, talking about, when someone hits the age of 25, they're too old for this kind of thing. And I think it's a concept which it doesn't make any sense. Maybe I'm just saying this because I'm older myself, which means I find it easier to relate to, sort of artists who are in their 30s and such like. But I just see them and they're having as much fun and doing as much creative things. But yes, you do have to evolve it. You can't go around acting like a child forever. I've been very interested about how Kyari Pami has approached this issue, in that obviously her entire image was kind of like this bubblegum pop craziness. Really got to get my words right, haven't I? Bubblegum pop craziness that really needed to be refined as she got older, and she's kept the sort of the imagery and a lot of the bows and everything, but all that kind of bubblegum popness, but she's managed to make it look much more, she's managed to make it work. And of course now the fact that she's a mother as well has played with that greatly. I think she's carried herself, the whole way she's carried herself and presented herself, it's clear that she's an adult, but an adult who just likes to do playful and youthful things. So this is a subject that comes up a lot, because as we get more and more of these young bands coming through, it's interesting to see how the more established bands and the bands who've been around a while, especially those who've traded on this image of being quite youthful, it's interesting to see how they address this subject. I am getting near to a loud, busy road, so I'm wondering how that's going to impact this video. I'm also very cautious of the fact this is the one busy area I've got to walk through. So not wanting to be a nuisance streamer, I'm trying to control the angle of the phone and the camera a lot. But I guess this brings us on to the subject of new artists, where new artists come through and how they pick up the buck, how they move the scene forwards. I'm not going to catch that green light. I'm not, am I? That green light has left me behind. I don't want to just be standing at a junction holding a camera up my face, so I'm going to strategically walk around the junction just based on, this one will turn green, I'll go across there first. Okay. So this brings us on to the subject of how other bands take up the mantle. And of course, it's interesting to reference that subject that we were talking about in regards to the whole BABYMETAL thing, because of course the company in question tried to create a sequel. We had the whole metal verse thing. Now, however you might rate or consider the reasoning behind that, it was clear that they were trying to produce kind of like a follow-up, a second one. I think a few people said that to their reading of it, it seemed like it was a more poppy version. It was a little bit more light. I think the members as a general were younger. It seemed like they were trying to produce a sequel, but ultimately all they really did was take the formula, rinse and repeat. And if anything, they lost a lot of the things that made it quite fun. I mean, the idea of having several members but only one of them actually sing was bizarre at best. And then, they gave them outfits that looked a lot like the groups that they were following up from, which meant it just felt like a sequel. And all they did was make a copy. And no disrespect again to the artists or even the songwriters, but it felt like the people behind it made a copy that was so close to the original that all it ever was going to be done, all that was going to happen is it was going to be seen as not being the original. They were just always going to be not BABYMETAL. And yet, when you look at what baby metal fans actually have gravitated towards. I've noticed that although they themselves have been around for a few years, a lot of people have really picked up on the Hanabiya train. And Hanabiya, of course, are a wildly different group. There's so little in common on the surface, but they've picked up what people loved about the whole baby metal thing, which is having the metal aspect, but mixing it with other genres, you know, having bits of EDM and pop go in there, still having catchy choruses that you can sing along to, being able to do something which makes you headbang, but at the same time also gives you a feeling that, oh, isn't this cute? Isn't this fun? Aren't they nice? You know, sort of that feeling of it's both legitimately cute, but it's also legitimately really good heavy metal. And I think this is what people actually wanted from something new and exciting that continued. And I'm not saying that everyone who's a Hanabiya fan is a baby metal fan or even vice versa, but I'm saying that it felt like much more of a legitimate sequel to baby metal than Metalverse ever did. And that's the point. Times move on, people move on, groups can maintain the thing that made them them, but at the same time, as they move on, they've kind of got to evolve a little bit with time. And if you want to find something new to pick up the mantle, you can't just rinse and repeat. Now, one of the interesting demonstrations, you get groups like Scandal, who obviously have adjusted their sound a lot over the time, but they weren't really looking to catch any trends. They were just sort of enjoying themselves. So yeah, their fame kind of like died down over time, but by the fact they've just maintained quality and consistency of always having some fresh ideas and, you know, basically always being Scandal, but with slight little tweaks and things that make their sound new and fresh over time without completely uprooting what makes them them. It's been interesting to see how, yeah, they've not been the big name chart topper that they might once have seemed like at the beginning of their career, but they've maintained a loyal following, which is something you can definitely do in Japan. I think a lot about obviously their peers and soon to play a show with them, Silent Siren, who they obviously at the height of their career, they were very much the sort of poppy, cute, that was a big part of what they did, but then they've obviously taken quite a switch since becoming independent and, you know, becoming a three-piece. And yeah, okay, so the fame does die down a little bit, but you can still continue with good grace and your fan support, depending on if you reinterpret your fame in a way that feels genuine, you know? So I think the thing that comes down to all of this is it's just got to feel genuine. It's got to feel like something that's real. You can continue and you can still be yourself, but you've got to try and make sure that you're updating it in a way that people find believable and, you know, continues what they love about your group without sounding like you're self-parodying, I think is the best way of putting it. You know, just trying to relive the old days is a bit cringe, but you can find a way of capturing the old days in a new way. But of course, there's one thing that obviously underpins all of this. Probably the most exciting part of all of this is the fact that obviously there are so many new groups and, you know, new bands and new everything. Of course, that's the main thing really that I spend most of my time following these days, is that I'm very active working with upcoming bands. That light is going to go red if I don't run for it. I am going to... You know, by crossing at that junction, which I didn't want to cross out before, I've now put myself in a much more busy part of town. I need to... What I need to do is I need to circle around and go to a slightly quieter bit. So I'm just going to stand here. I'm going to cross over at the next junction. And then I'm nearly at the end of this video anyway, so I probably don't need to worry as much as I am. But I'm just going to stand out front of a busy supermarket, pointing the camera upwards so it's not at anyone's face. We're going to cross over and then we're going to talk about new bands. It's nearly green. Nearly green. Go green. Sun's in my eyes. Go green. Sorry. Green. I have no idea what this video is going to look like, but I'm assuming not good. Right, and I'm in the shade as well, so the cameras are slightly to overheat. Right, so where were we? Yes, with the new bands that I'm usually working with, the one of the biggest factors really there is just, well, I say factors, one of the most exciting things is seeing what each one of them brings to the table. And I think there's a lot of people who've commented before, and it's very true, that, you know, pretty much everything musically you can think of has been done. I mean, now with like computer technology being around for so long that there's virtually every single sound you can even imagine thinking up has been done, whether it be done by a noise group or by like an EDM group, or right down to things like what was it called? What was that genre of music which was just like crazy now, noises over a beat? Can't remember now, that was a few years ago. Someone tell me if you know what I'm thinking of, like Skrillex and all that stuff. Dubstep, that's it. Even dubstep, every wild sound has been done. So now when you look at young bands, there's an interesting mixture between those who are referencing old school things. I think of like Eminem, who obviously I worked with. Yeah, I don't really work with them actively, but big fan of theirs, always a supporter of theirs, and did that video with them for Band Broadcast back in the day. Back in the day, it was like a few months ago. They're obviously going for a kind of an old school metal hip hop sound, which is a little bit old school, but they're bringing something fresh and youthful and exciting to it, and they're perfecting a sound that we've heard years ago, but doing it better. Then you've got bands like Candid, who, you knew I was going to reference them, who are doing a sound that is, in a way, it's kind of got like a central rock sound, which is kind of timeless, but the way they're structuring it together, they're using kind of slightly raged out moments that are a little bit punky. They're using melodies that are straight from sort of soft rock. They use, a lot of their harmonies and counter harmonies on guitar are very much from like soft rock, but they're using these really cool bass lines that you could see from something much more intense. I just love the mixture of sounds that we're seeing from a lot of these new bands. So in a way, it's not like the world is moving on in such a wild way that suddenly everything's changed and the old sounds aren't relevant anymore. But it is nice to see how older groups can grow in a way that, like I said before, keeps them fresh, keeps them in touch with the ever-changing landscape, whilst also still being themselves. And seeing these new bands just bringing a new touch, a new feel, a new interesting view to what we can do with sounds that might already be established, but just seeing them and using them in totally new ways, and of course bringing us new voices, new sounds, new messages. So I've got to be honest, I'm very excited for both the continuation of the older bands and groups who we know from before, and the newer artists as well. But I think the one thing that we all have to accept is that time does move on, and that's not a bad thing. Just because we get new things and maybe things that we love change and are not quite the same as they were before, doesn't mean we've lost the past. But you can't stay trapped in the past. So I think this is one of those off-the-cuff messages where I've said a lot and yet at the same time said precisely nothing. This is the alleyway that I was planning to walk down before. See, this is nice and quiet. This is more what I was going for originally. I think one of the groups who really led the way in this it was amazing to see how Perfume changed so many impressions, because especially with the idol industry, the idea that you get to a certain age and it's just not viable anymore. I think they were the primary. They really set the record straight on that, showing that you can keep on doing it if you're good at it. You're good at they're still doing the dance, they're still doing the look, they still got all that going on. You can keep on doing it forever if you're good at it. You know what though, I'm actually going to jump in with a little drop in here, because I've just left the shop that I said I was going to, and I suddenly realized that when I recorded the video that you've up until now been watching, I forgot to mention one thing that, I was mostly talking about how groups themselves evolve over time and how the image and everything. But of course, one of the big topics is that of songwriting. And I was kind of skirting around that issue. So I just wanted to briefly reference this, because this was a topic I talked about quite a lot on a video probably a couple of years ago on Ears to the East, where we were talking about how songwriting can change over time and how it can lose old fans. Now, I've said a million times before that, I would expect and I hope for bands to change in small ways their songwriting over time, because each album should be an experiment with whatever the new idea you have right now is, and you should, as an artist, be looking to grow. I mean, there are some artists who just have a sound, they stick to it. Sorry, I can hear the bag rattling. I hope you can't hear that too much as well. So I mean, this is why I didn't want to record coming back from the shops. But there's a lot of bands who, they might stick to a certain sound, and their fans might like that. And of course, there'll be certain elements of your sound that you'd expect to remain, just so that you are still the same band. I mean, if your sound entirely changed, you might as well start a new band. But, there are a lot of groups who each album has its own identity. I say this a lot with bands like BAND-MAID. And the funny thing is you'll have some people who say, oh, the band's not what they used to be anymore. They've lost what I loved about them. And that may be true. It may be true because, if you change, if you have a sound and your sound shifts 20% in one direction, it could be that 20% that you no longer have, those aspects of your sound, is maybe what was most important to certain fans. So whenever there are changes, you will lose some people, and changes with time to your writing style, as I say, are something that should be expected, because if you're just rinsing and repeating the same sound over and over again forever, then what's the point in making new albums, So I am a great believer that bands and artists should evolve their sound. They should make adjustments to their sound. They should do that because they're creatively excited. The question is, of course, how do you maintain as many fans as possible? What is it that you should do in order to still be the same band whilst changing your sound? And ironically, this comes back to that thing I was saying a moment ago, and that's kind of what sparked me to suddenly think, why didn't I talk about this? And this is why I'm now recording this second bit, is because really the best way to assure that your sound changes over time, but maintains as many fans as possible, is once again to be honest to yourself. See, here's the thing. When you talk, it sounds so like such a hippie thing, hey, be true to yourself. But there's a degree to that. When you think about the differences between bands, there are so many bands, as I pointed out, who are referencing a certain palette of sounds that we already know. Metal bands, it's the distortions they use. It's not like they're the first band to ever use it. The riffs they use might contain very familiar aspects. We've heard so many people nitpick and say, well, if you look at this BAND-MAID riff, it was actually exactly the same as this riff from T-Rex or something, when the band might never have even heard that song before. It's just a coincidence because they've only got 12 notes to choose from in the normal sort of musical range. So these things are going to happen, but the things that set your songs apart are the things that very much come from how you apply yourself, the little expressive way in how you deliver things. It might be the lyrics, it might be the certain attitude you put things. There's so many more aspects that make up music, and I feel that if you're always true to yourself, then there will be a factor that will be, yes, it will be something mathematically quantifiable. Someone will be able to, a music expert will be able to go through and, point out certain scales and, musical techniques that you regularly use. But they might be things that you yourself don't think about. They're just things you naturally apply. And so if you're a band who's usually doing like hard rock songs, and then suddenly you decide to put out a pop song, but once again, it's a pop song very much written from your heart. It's a pop song written from how you like melodies to sound, how you like arrangements to sound, then there's going to be aspects of that song which are still going to quintessentially sound like you. And to an honest fan who's open-minded, will probably maintain them. I think of things like BAND-MAID, again, with like Start Over, with About Us as well. I mean, About Us on a production level, when it comes in from that, with that little weird effects thing, that's the kind of sound that you would expect to be very much from like a modern pop R&B kind of song. You'd expect that to scare off hard rock fans so quickly, and yet so many people love that song About Us, and more than just for the melody, more than just for the lyrics, which of course are very much about the fans. But I feel like you can do almost anything tonally, you can make almost any tonal shift so long as you're honest with yourself about writing a song that you love. And I think that's how bands like Scandal, who I mentioned earlier, have managed to maintain the sense of always being Scandal whilst also having songs that have wildly differed. You look at things like Pinhill Surfer and then Saisho Kiki Kimi, I can never pronounce that song. And then you listen to songs like Eternal. They all sound like Scandal songs, despite being hugely different. And of course, just like with BAND-MAID, they are a band who took over songwriting when originally they had songwriters who wrote their music. And I would argue that with both bands, easily the best majority of their material has come subsequent to that point, because it's all been within the context of knowing what the artist sounds like, that songwriting style. I always say this, when a band has a songwriting style, a sound, that's kind of what you love about them. That consistency, not in doing the same thing over and over again, but that always, you hear it and you know just in the way that they go about making their songs that they are them. And I think that's a big part. We mentioned Silent Siren earlier, and of course Silent Siren have like their own staff songwriter, but he's basically the fifth member of the band. He's there for everything, and he works with them for everything. Just walked through a cloud of flies, got them right in my mouth. Talking and walking, not the best idea. But anyway, yeah, so this is something I wanted to add is this, because this songwriting component is hugely important, especially for someone like me who keeps on going on about the fact that I think songwriting is easily the most important part of all of the things we talk about here. I love musicianship, love all of these things, but songwriting comes first. Songwriting is what gives us the songs that we love. So, yeah, thought I'd throw in this little part. And then once again, as I did originally when I filmed that first part of this video, I'm going to wrap things up and try and end this nicely. But as I discovered when I tried to end this video the first time, it's very hard to do with two objects in both your hands, because I've got to do my little chow chow thing. So I'm going to stop the microphone on this. All right. So now you're on the phone. Oh, sorry, only on the camera microphone. I'm going to turn you towards that pretty view there. Isn't it gorgeous? God, I love Tokyo. Just love Japan. I'm going to say thank you all for tuning in. Get in the comments below, as always. Tell me what you think. Tell me about examples of bands who you think have stood the test of time well in image or in songwriting. Maybe a band who stood the test of time well in one but not the other. You know, maybe they've kept their songs going, but their image isn't quite stayed with them over time. They've lost the spark of their original image. Maybe the other way around. Maybe a band who still kept their image, but maybe their songwriting doesn't live up to it. Or hopefully examples of bands who've done both right, artists who've done both right. I'd love to hear what you guys think, and of course your opinions on all of this as a general. But people are walking towards me and I want to end this video before it looks like I'm just a nuisance streamer. So I'm going to move you over to, oh no, I've got to do the chow chow thing, haven't I? That's why I put away the microphone. All right, get in the comments, tell me what you think, and until I eventually see you there, for now, ciao ciao.